The Gemara that we learned yesterday, uh, basically we're dealing with the discussion of, was a continuation really from the day before about having a sukkah that doesn't have walls. It doesn't have no walls, but doesn't have what we would consider walls, what we know to be as considered walls. This sukkah doesn't have those. It has four poles. And could you use poles as being considered walls? And the conclusion of the Gemara is that there is an opinion in the Gemara of Yaakov who uses this leniency, a similar leniency that we have for Shabbos, and it had to do in Shabbos with the law of having a well, and the wells had a big problem on Shabbos. There was a problem of getting water from the well because the well is considered a private domain, and it's located inside a public domain. So if you pull the water up and bring it out of the well, you're basically bringing water from a private domain to a public domain on Shabbos. So the rabbis needed to find some leniency, needed to permit this, because what were people supposed to do? Now, for people themselves, you could really climb into the well and drink. So it wasn't such a problem for the person. It was more of a problem for the person's animals. And so the rabbis, the people are traveling to Jerusalem. They're sleeping along the way. They're stopping off on the way. They need water for their animals. For themselves, they could maybe climb in, and then they're inside a private domain. It's called a Rishus HaYachid, so they don't really have to carry the water out. But it's more for their animals that they need water. So the rabbis came up with a leniency that if you make sort of like four beams along the side, on the four corners, I should say, four beams on the four corners of the well, and that entire area is considered a private domain.
Rabbi,
Rabbinically, it's not really good, except that the rabbis permitted it. Yes, David.
what about, you would think that the children or the babies would be something that would come first before their animals.
Yeah, interesting. I'm not so familiar with the Gemara that it talks about it. It's a Gemara in Eruvin, somewhere around page 20, but I don't know exactly. So yeah, it deserves to be looked into why that is. Good point. And what it does say over there is that in general, the issue was more the animals, meaning that if it was a scenario where a person could, it helped for people as well, but the concern was more for the people. I guess maybe because the animals, I guess people didn't bring their little babies. They were exempt from doing the pilgrimage, maybe. I'm not sure. No, I don't know if that works. Does that work? How did we learn in Chagiga, where the people, the child couldn't really walk, they were pretty much exempt, right? But the question is what, they would leave them back home? I'm not exactly sure what the Gemara. I would have to look up the Gemara in Eruvin. Again, it's not really the Gemara. It's not really applicable to what we're learning. It's brought here for the purpose of talking about walls. So yeah, if someone wants to look into that, maybe Ezra might know from Eruvin. I don't know. Anyone else here know Eruvin? See if we have any about the people, about the kids. Like why is the Gemara there more concerned whether we make this special leniency for the animals to be able to drink? What about little children to be able to drink? Why doesn't the Gemara say that's the reason? Maybe they can't climb. Maybe kids that can't climb and we're afraid that they'll fall in, in the well. Why are we more concerned about the animals than the little kids? Yeah. It probably talks about it there. I don't know, but or at least the commentaries there. Anyway, so the Gemara here, it wants to use that idea. Now, over there, the walls needed to be it needed to be a right angle, the size of an amma, a cubit, each direction. So you had 4 of these right angles, like L-shaped walls that were an amma in one direction, amma perpendicular direction, the other way, and therefore it was considered at least the rabbis relaxed their normal laws of how a reshus hayachid, private domain, has to look. They said that this is good enough, and this was a leniency for the people. Again, the rabbis had the right to make this leniency because they're the ones who prohibited war, because biblically it is considered a permitted area, private domain to carry, because it has some type of wall. It's like a secluded area. But biblically, it wouldn't be, but rabbinically, it wasn't good enough. But the rabbis relaxed their own law, that normally you need to have more of a wall, and the wall can't have such a big break in it. It was more than 10 amos, the break, and it's more empty space than solid. So you had 2 issues really over there. That there's normally a break is limited to 10 amos. So in between a wall, if you have a break in the wall, you could get away with it. It's considered an entrance or an exit if it's less than 10 amos, less than 10 cubits. And here it would apply, the leniency applied even if it's bigger than 10 cubits. And also, normally you can get away with with an entrance, an opening in a wall, if it's oimed meruba al haparatz, if it's more solid than empty. So if the wall is majority solid and this is a little empty, but here in this scenario, in the laws of with regard to the well that they needed to get water, actually is much more empty than solid. You only have these 4 solid 4 posts, and the rest of it is an empty space. So it's majority open, and the very small minority is solid. Yet the rabbis relaxed their rule that you would need it to be a much better wall, and that had to do with a situation for those that were going to Eretz Yisrael for the Iyar Regel, for the pilgrimage, and it was permitted. So here in the laws of Sukkah, we are taking that leniency as well. And according to Rabbi Yaakov, you could take that leniency that the rabbis had with regard to these 4 walls. It's going to be used as well for the laws of Sukkah. And it's going to be considered that each of the Sukkah is considered to have 4 walls. How exactly he allows it to be considered permitted for a Sukkah really deserves some thought, because it does seem, I mean, this is rabbinically considered a wall, but what about biblically? Like, what is his exemption? I'm just thinking out loud here. What is the source of such a leniency? This makes sense regarding the laws of Shabbos. And okay, you want to find the leniency to carry. It's a rabbinic law. The rabbis could be lenient and they could permit it. Why would it work here if we want to consider, you want to be considered that you ate in a sukkah, and this is going to be considered a kosher sukkah? The rabbis are going to make a special law. Like, what permits you to consider this to be considered a kosher sukkah? So what it seems that it has to do with is connected to the fact that we hold that the 3rd wall is allowed to be a tefach, that the 3rd wall of a sukkah is a tefach. It seems that Rabbi Yaakov must be borrowing that idea that just like we're allowing the third wall to be a handbreadth, somehow Rabbi Yaakov says all three walls could be handbreadths, or in his case, it's four walls actually. They could be handbreadth, and that somehow would be permissible to be considered a wall. So where does he get it from? He gets it from this halacha l'maisha misinai that we understand the third wall could be a tefach. He obviously understood that the halacha l'maisha misinai permitted even even all through all the walls to be a tefach, and something along those lines is his reason. It seems to be his reasoning. Again, it seems surprising. He's taking a law from Shabbos and connecting it over here. Seemingly, they're very different laws. To the for a few reasons. One is that the laws of Shabbos have to do with a rabbinic law, and here he's trying to make it work for a biblical law. It's considered you dwelled in the sukkah. Number two, the laws of Shabbos, as we see, even when it talks about it regarding laws of Shabbos, we see there's a difference. Over there, we use the law of an amma, cubit, for his posts. And here he uses the size of a handbreadth for his posts. So, which not surprising, because you could be more strict with regard to the laws of Shabbos. But what exactly is he taking? Why are we, what is the what is really the connection with the laws of Eruvin? So this is something that deserves to be looked into, something to be thought about, and maybe we'll try to find some commentary, see if there's any more explanation here on the source of Rabbi Yaakov. Obviously, we don't follow Rabbi Yaakov's halacha, we don't paskin that way, but it would be interesting to know what what he's basing it on. And as I mentioned, it seems that it has something to do with the fact that we hold the third wall is good enough with it being a handbreadth. He uses that for the other walls as well. Okay, now we're up to the next Gemara. We're on page 4b, about 6 lines up from the bottom of the page. And the Gemara here says, V'she'eno gavoya asara tefachim. It brings a statement from the Mishnah. The Mishnah had mentioned that there's a problem if you have a sukkah that is too small, it's too low, and if it doesn't have 10 tefachim, it is invalid. So the Gemara now says minolan. How do we know this law that a sukkah that doesn't have 10 tefachim is invalid? And this really brings us back to something we spoke about earlier, that we said that if you have a sukkah that doesn't have 10 tefachim, we called it a dira srucha. We called it a distasteful dwelling. And it had to do with the fact that you were in a sukkah that the schach was going down and too low. And Abaye wanted to say that it's still kosher because it's very minimal amount of schach that's minimizing the size. And Rava said, no, it's called a dira srucha. It's called a distasteful dwelling. And so seemingly that law explains the Mishnah, why the Mishnah says that a sukkah has to be at least 10 tefachim, has to be distasteful. So one way of answering is what the Gemara is trying to find out, is how do we know that 10 tefachim, that the sukkah has to be at least 10 tefachim, and 10 tefachim is the size of a wall. That the at least the commentaries mention this, is that this law applies to other things besides sukkah as well. So the sukkah, you could tell me a law of dira srucha. That's very nice regarding the laws of sukkah. But what about regarding the laws of Shabbos? How tall does a wall have to be for regarding the laws of Shabbos or for other purposes? So because we're dealing with other halachas, that's why the Gemara wants another source, and it's not satisfied with the source of the dira srucha. So this would be, this would be a reason why the Gemara wants this other source. Additionally, we mentioned earlier that the Rambam seems to say that the Dira Srucha reasoning is only a lechatchila. It's a preferable thing. That it should be it shouldn't be a Dira Srucha. And according to the Rambam, the reason why the Gemara looks for a source that the walls have to be 10 tefachim is because the case earlier was actually permitted. It was permitted because the schach really did not minimize the walls of the sukkah. Your walls were kosher walls. The schach made it not so enjoyable to dwell in. And so that wasn't a preferable way to dwell in the sukkah, but it was a kosher sukkah. And here the Gemara says, what if the walls are not 10 tefachim, 10 handbreadths? Then it's not even a kosher sukkah in the first place. So according to the Rambam, we sort of understand the difference between these two Gemaras. But the other commentaries mention that the reason is in order for other laws, like regarding the laws of Shabbos and so on. And we want to know about, in the laws of Shabbos, there's no rule about dira srucha, distasteful dwelling. But we do need to know the laws of the size of a wall. So the Gemara asked the question, Manola. The Gemara says, Itmar. Itmar, it was said. It was said in the study hall. Rav Chanina, Rav Yechanan, Rav Chaviva, all these rabbis, Masnu, they taught, and the Gemara interrupts this by saying that even though it says here the word Rav Yechanan, but when we have this whole group of rabbis, there's a mistake. It's not Rabbi Yochanan, it's really Rabbi Yonasan. Bekula Seder Mayed, and the entire study of the holiday tractates. Whenever you have this group called Ki Haizuga, whenever you have this this group of rabbis, Chilufe Rabbi Yochanan, Ma'ile Rabbi Yonasan, you really have to just change one thing, that when these four rabbis, one of the names is slightly off. It's a difference of like a letter, that it's instead of Yochanan, it's Yonasan. So Chilufe Rabbi Yochanan and Ma'ile Rabbi Yonasan, they have to switch it to Rabbi Yonasan. Okay. So anyway, these rabbis taught as follows. What did they teach? They taught that the source of 10 Tvachim is Arain Tisha, the Kapiris Tefach. That a sukkah needs to be at least 10 Tvachim. If not, it's puzzle. It's learned from the fact that the Arain, the ark in the Mishkan, how tall was the ark in the Mishkan? So if you remember in the Psukim in Parshas Truma, it says that Amasayim Achetzi Arkoi, V'ama V'chetzi Rachbei, V'ama V'chetzi Kaimasa. It says that it was 2.5 long, it was 1.5 amos wide, and 1.5 amos high. Now, if you remember how the Aron was made, the way it was made was 3 boxes. You had a bottom box that actually extended taller than the inner boxes. The inner boxes, of course, are slightly smaller, but not only are they smaller, so they fit inside the outer box, but also they were not as tall as the outer box. And so the inner boxes, the outer boxes, there was the outer box that was gold, the inner box that was wood, and then you had a inner box from the wood was also gold. So it was like gold plated, if you want to call it that. It was gold surrounded, wood plated with gold. It was like wood that was surrounded with gold. So there was a box on top of the wood, a box under the wood. The wood was a box. So you had these 3 boxes. Basically, the 2 boxes, 2 outer boxes covered the wood, so the wood was not visible. And on top of the Arain was a thick block of gold. That was the cover. It was called a kapiris. very confusing. It's easy to confuse. There's the paroiches and the kapiris. The paroiches is a curtain. That's like when you open the ark in your shul, they call it the paroiches. The paroiches means a curtain, but there also was a curtain in the Mishkan as well. And the item that we are talking about is called the kapiris. And that was this solid golden block. And imagine how big it was. It was an amma and a half wide. I'm sorry, 2.5 ammas long and an amma and a half wide. So it's a nice size piece of gold. It's 2.5 ammas long would be approximately 5 feet, maybe a little less, 5 feet of gold. And then an amma and a half wide would be approximately 3 feet, a little less maybe. So it's 3 feet by 5 feet of gold. And how thick was it? So here our Gemara is going to conclude that it's a tefach, that it's a handbreadth. It's about 3 to 4 inches thick. So it's a nice gold